see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Hi, it's Edwin Rutsch from the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and today I'm here with Kim Wright, who is a lawyer and is the publisher of Cutting Edge Law, which is a website for kind of alternative legal, for the alternative legal movement, I guess. Perhaps you could describe it for us, Kim, just maybe introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, thanks for having me, Edwin. I consider myself a leader in the integrative law movement. And just as in medicine, we have we sort of went from the scientific kind of approach of medicine to the kind of more holistic, and then we started integrating the holistic into the scientific, and we have the integrative movement now. Then in law, the same thing has been going on. It hasn't had as much attention as the integrative medicine movement, but I think that's starting to change. So, for example, in 2010, the American Bar Association asked me to write a book about this movement, and so I'm also the author of Lawyers as Peacemakers, Practicing Holistic Problem-Solving Law, that came out in 2010 and was a bestseller for the ABA for most of the rest of that year. They also named me a legal rebel. And while that is a nice thing to have on my resume, the thing that meant the most to me was that it meant that the legal profession was starting to recognize us. We had, up until that time, just kind of been the renegades and kind of the weird lawyers who didn't quite fit in because we weren't all analytical. We were actually having emotions, and we were expressing them, and we were letting our clients have emotions, and we were dealing with those, and we were looking at a bigger picture and looking at bigger stakeholders, and we were working on being conscious in our lives and conscious as lawyers. And so having the American Bar Association recognize that and actually having the book become a bestseller was part of a milestone for us.
Yeah, so you created around this movement for kind of an alternative law, a law that brings in the whole person. You have been a real leader in that movement, and you created your website, Cutting Edge Law, to kind of support that movement.
Yeah, to support it and to showcase it. I didn't invent the movement, but I invented a way of bringing a lot of different people together with the Cutting Edge Law site. So, for example, restorative justice has been around. I mean, it was part of the native peoples. It's ancient. The tribal circles, and it was part of Truth and Reconciliation. But people didn't see that in this sort of in the same realm as collaborative law, which is a very similar overlapping model in the divorce area. And the same kind of issue is going on in corporations with conscious capitalism, and it's going on in legal education. It really is a movement. It seemed like back in the 1990s, there was sort of, I describe it like popcorn. There things that shift out. And if you were a family lawyer, you might have hopped and gone towards collaborative law, and if you were in the criminal system, you might have done restorative justice or problem-solving courts or something like that. But if you, there were different ways of expressing this, but it was the same movement.
Okay, we just had a little audio glitch, and I just disabled the video camera to you. But I'm still recording it.
Okay.
So what you're kind of saying is there's a general movement kind of within society for more of a holistic kind of a living, and this is you're kind of supporting this within the legal community.
Right, right, and lawyers were already adopting this in their law practices, but they were considered to be kind of the weird lawyers. And for some of us, that was kind of a badge of honor to be the weird lawyer, because it was like it wasn't a marketing technique, but it was a way that we got recognized. It's like, oh, you can go and hire Kim Wright to help you with your divorce because she actually understands what it is to be involved in such an emotional turmoil, and she will help you with the emotions as well as the legal piece. And she has a much more holistic perspective. And so for me, it was when I was practicing law, it was the way I practiced. But I discovered that I wasn't the only one, and other people were the kind of the oddball lawyer in their own town. And so one of the things I've done with Cutting Edge Law is I've gone to some of these people who were courageous pioneers and were willing to step out of the model that was basically lawyers don't have feelings, we're not supposed to have feelings, and our clients are not supposed to have feelings. And so we were able to step out of that and become more holistic lawyers and more empathetic, compassionate, and connecting with our clients as human beings. And so by showcasing people who were doing that, I think that we started getting more acceptance. And the ABA editor actually said, we think this is the way law is going. And that's why we published this book. And in the last few years, they've actually published many books that are along this line.
What was the title of your book?
Lawyers as Peacemakers.
Okay, Lawyers Peacemakers. Well, there's a great quote by Johan Galtung, who's one of the founders of a lot of these different peace and conflict studies programs. And essentially it says, peace is resolving conflict with empathy, nonviolence, and creativity, and it's a never-ending process. So I kind of see that part about empathy is the part that I'm really kind of focusing on, and I think that's kind of what one of the qualities that your group and that movement is kind of bringing to the fore. And so what I'm really looking at is how do we, in kind of the broader sense, build a culture of empathy? And I was wondering what kind of insights you have about that.
I like that definition of peace, especially that it's an ongoing process. One of the things that happens to law students when we go into law school, typically we're normal people, and in terms of just we're a little more idealistic than the average person, but there's nothing extraordinary about us. We don't have less feelings, but we go into law school and we start focusing on only thinking like a lawyer, and eventually we're actually taught that the things that are most important around relationships and connecting with people, emotions, empathy, being in that, all of that is not relevant. And the legal cases don't ask, well, what happened to this person after that famous case? Like, so she lost that case and it made law, but what happened to her? Or what happened to her that made it worth taking it all the way to the Supreme Court? And so we're taught that not to ask those questions. If people ask those questions, they're actually laughed at. And we start becoming just sort of a walking brain. And it hurts the lawyer. By the end of law school, most lawyers or recent grads have a much higher rate of depression and substance abuse and so forth than the general public. And we are much more focused on extrinsic values of our prestige and making money and so forth than the rest of the public. And of course, intrinsic values are the ones that really give us the quality of life. And so we shift in law school, and then we go out into practice with people who have had that same shift, and we're told, don't feel, basically. And as we suppress that, we become, I would almost say, we become that stereotype of the lawyer who is not a human being. somebody I know wrote a book called something like "Lawyers Are Human Beings Too" or something like that, and it was actually a quote funny title, and so part of that learning to think like a lawyer, which is a famous line from the paper chase in Professor Kingsfield, is to cut off our empathy. And as we allow our empathy to come in, then we start looking at, well, this system isn't working. And how can we actually design this system so that it actually takes into account all of these human emotion and relatedness and all of the things that we have been taught are not important.
So you're looking to change law so that it brings empathy back into the system and the process.
Yes, my mission is to transform the legal profession, and that's why I created Cutting Edge Law.
And how do you go about creating that? How do you change that system? What are the ways of doing that?
Well, there's a quote. I think it's I think both Einstein and Bucky Fuller said similar things. Is that you build the parallel system. You don't go in and try to tear down the existing system because it's there for a reason. People created the legal system that we have in response to things that were going on in society. So, just as in medicine, the scientific system arose because there were things like leeches and the medicine shows and things like that didn't have a lot of reliability. Although I'm told that some of those, even leeches, are now being brought back because they found out that maybe they did have. But at the time, people said, well, that's just not very effective. And so they went very, very scientific, and the pendulum swung to that level. Well, in law, we had things like jousting and dueling, and if you weren't willing to kill somebody over your conflict, and the court system was just not very effective, and so the court system developed so that people actually had a place, and what had been the village elder who helped people resolve things became a legal system that was based on we have to have ways of measuring fairness, and we have to create these structures. And as it's grown, it's been more and more distant from the actual people. And so you hear of things like the 3 strikes you're out, and somebody who steals a loaf of bread because they're hungry has their 3rd strike and they go to prison, and we have the highest rate of incarceration in the world on a per capita basis, and there's the war on drugs and all of these things that are going on in our legal system that people are seeing, this really doesn't work. It doesn't work just to keep locking people up. When they come out, they're not better for having been locked up. And so we're looking at what is the alternative system. If we're going to have a system that includes everything, includes that we have to have order and safety, which are values of the current system, but also includes the human values of love and empathy and compassion and so forth, then what does that system look like? So a lot of my work for the last 10 years has been looking for models that were like that. So, for example, I mentioned restorative justice. In restorative justice, the goal is to heal the harm of crime. And so the healing the harm of crime isn't what the prosecutor is about. Right now, in the adversarial system, you got to prove they did it, and then you got to punish them. But if your goal is how can we heal the harm of crime, then you're looking for, well, how is the victim harmed? How is the community harmed? And what is it about this offender that we could heal so that everybody would be healed? So an example I like to use is a kid steals a purse from an old lady on your street. And so in the existing system, the police come, they arrest the kid, they take him to jail, they lock him up, and that's supposed to resolve it. In the restorative justice system, there would be an opportunity to have the little old lady say, well, this is how this impacted me. And the people on the street could say, well, this is how it impacted us. And then there would also be an interaction with the kid and his family, or a coach or somebody, about how it impacted them, and then an opportunity, having seen the impact of that action, for the kid to say, I'm sorry, and to make amends. And so a lot of the restorative justice has grown up with kids in juvenile court, where kids could actually apologize, and then maybe as part of making amends would become, like the yard boy or something for the old lady on the street, so that that person becomes a real person and not just, some old lady that is sort of an object on the street. So that's the restorative justice model. There's a model now with problem-solving courts. And what happened with problem-solving courts is that judges kept seeing the same people coming back over and over and over, and there'd be drunk drivers or drug addicts or something like that, who were there because they committed a crime because of an addiction. And the judges said, we have to get to the root of this. We can't just keep putting people in jail because they have an addiction, and they're just going to keep getting worse and worse and worse, because the putting them in jail doesn't resolve the underlying problem. And so they created a model that includes social workers and addiction specialists, and they are working with the person who has the drug problem to get them off drugs and to make amends, and they put in structures where they are expected to attend, and for example, an AA meeting, or they have things that are expected of them, and the court holds that tension of making sure they do it. And in many states, the problem-solving courts have actually led to closing prisons, because they actually are getting people clean and sober and productive as citizens, rather than just locking them up and continuing the cycle. So those are two of the models that are in this movement, that are the sort of the new system. There are thousands of restorative justice programs. We haven't counted them in a long time, and it's kind of hard to count them because there's not like a network of them. And then there is a network of problem-solving courts, and there are something in the neighborhood of 3,000 of those in the United States now. So that is a completely different system that works better and actually has a longer impact than just locking people up.
So we just turned on the lights there, so we're getting a little bit more light. So it sounds like what you're saying, Kim, is to, instead of just focusing on transforming the existing system, which is kind of like this competitive system, is to bring up alternative empathic systems that maybe can model empathy. Would that be?
Yes, rather than resisting the and getting into competition with the existing system, that's sort of playing the same game. And so what we're doing is we're creating other systems. And the thing about it too is that we can kind of experiment and see what works in smaller systems. And then as we develop the skills and we see the systems that work best, then we can bring those back to the existing dominant system, and have some history to say, that one of the favorite phrases is it's evidence-based results, and we can say, look at this is really making a difference, and we're fulfilling on some of the values that the people who have the concerns about change have in that system. so if your primary goal is to save money, the problem-solving courts are really a great vehicle for that, because they save a lot of money in terms of, like I said, prisons are being closed, and even though it's more intensive at the beginning of the process, because you have a whole team of people working with the person who is an addict, then those early interventions actually keep people and then it gets them actually into the society where they're paying taxes and they're taking care of their own children rather than their children being in foster care, which then leads to their children being more productive citizens in the future rather than just kind of falling into the delinquency model. And so having that problem-solving approach, which is very, very empathetic and very much looking at how can we work together to resolve the underlying problem and have this person feel good about themselves and be able to participate in their life, then that leads to evidence that we can take back to the people who are concerned about the finances and say, this has, it saves you money and it has this other impact as well. And so some of the people who are most adamant about the problem-solving courts are those who are very fiscally conservative, who have traditionally been really concerned about whether change is going to somehow threaten that it's going to somehow cost them more money, or they're going to have, they're not going to be as safe or something like that.
Yeah. That's kind of, you're kind of addressing something I've kind of come up with too, is I've gone into different organizations, kind of movements already in place, and said, oh, what about empathy and this and that? And it's always like a real struggle. It's like these organizations get set in a certain way of looking at the world. And so I've kind of gotten to that same point of creating the alternative, and then how do we start from the ground up and based on the values of empathy, and what does that look like, and then have that as a model. And that sounds like what you're doing. Instead of being part of that conflict, that gladiatorial, existing gladiatorial type legal system, you're setting up a legal system, processes, restorative justice, that's more based around empathy.
Right, which is healthier for everybody, but also has a lot of the benefits that that the people who don't share that value would still want.
Yeah.
And and there were years that we were really experimenting, and there were some approaches that didn't work out. Some that sounded like really good ideas that never caught on. But the ones that have caught on and are making a difference are really growing. I mentioned also earlier collaborative law. In collaborative law, the two lawyers and the husband and wife of a divorce actually sign a contract at the beginning of the process saying they're not going to court. And then they bring in people who can help them as neutral advisors resolve their conflicts. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that a lot of people do in collaborative law is they'll bring in somebody who is an expert at communication, and they'll express a lot of empathy. I mean, I've been a collaborative lawyer, and we look at, what are your needs, and what are your needs, and how can we meet all of these needs, rather than pitting one person against the other, like there's somehow a competition to have their needs met. But we actually look at, well, how can we meet all of these needs? And it's a very successful model. Probably 30 to 50,000 lawyers, we actually have lost count, who've been trained in collaborative law. And it really is more based on empathy, in that everybody's having a hard time. We're going to look at that this is an emotional process as well as a process of legal dissolution. And we're going to honor that, and we're going to bring in people who are therapists who can help us, people who are experts at child development or whatever it is we need. If we need a real estate appraiser, it's a team approach that's focused on resolution and problem solving rather than competition.
Yeah, the one thing, like I see that the underlying value but under this model, that it's empathy. It's based on, I've done a little bit of mediation training, and you start off by offering empathy to the disputants, and you turn the disputants towards each other so that they can, you facilitate this empathic connection. And so for me personally, it seems like empathy is like the foundation of that whole process, that whole process is built on. However, within the restorative justice community, it seems like they kind of focus on justice, the term justice more, where there seems to be a kind of like there seems to be a confusion within the restorative justice community about what they're about. To me, that's just my perception.
Well, I haven't necessarily run into that. I don't look at things with your lens. But I think that, like, for example, Martin Luther King defines justice as love correcting that which revolts against love. And with that definition of justice, I can see the focus on justice. And in fact, most of the restorative justice folks I know really resonate with that quote. So he said, justice is love correcting that which revolts against love, which it was kind of hard for me to hear at first. And so if you're looking at justice from that perspective, it's different than what I think I hear you saying.
Yeah, there's a punitive justice, which is, well, it's like you're revolt. Well, there's two ways of looking at it. Like I would kind of, for me, kind of the first steps of love is like empathy, which is it's like empathy is like on a scale of, if love is 10, empathy is the first steps towards getting, it's like 1, 2, 3, 4. Then the highest would be love. And so I could even rephrase that and say, justice is, what was it, correcting, but
love correcting that which revolts against love.
Oh, okay, empathy correcting that which revolts against empathy. So it's, and how do you do that? Right? How do you make that correction? Do you make that correction by beating the person over the head, or do you empathize with them? So
yeah,
right, there's two approaches here of how do you make that correction.
Most of the restorative justice I've done, and I've worked with the families of murder victims, bringing them together with the person who killed their loved one. Most of what I've done in that area really is more based on empathy. But restorative justice is, justice, I guess, in general, is a spectrum. And restorative justice is probably a step on the way to what my friend Sylvia Clute talks about, unitive justice, where there is no victim, there is no offender. It's just all of us, empathizing with each other and doing the best we can. And so she's doing some experiments in Virginia on unitive justice. You might want to interview her,
yeah,
and hear what she has to say. But there's the punitive justice, which is we're going to lock them up, and that's going to somehow teach them a lesson. And then a spectrum, one can rehabilitate you. And then there's a restorative process, which has a lot of different flavors to it. It's sort of, you mentioned mediation. Mediation can be very empathetic, but some people actually use that term mediation in a way that is, it's just not accurate to me. So, for example, they use the term mediation when they're talking about somebody who's a retired judge listening to both sides and saying, well, this is what I would do, and therefore you should do this. And it gets more of an evaluation of the case rather than a mediation. And so that's on one end of the mediation spectrum, and on the other end of the mediation spectrum is the transformative mediation, which is about transforming the relationship and may have nothing to do with the settlement. So if you and your neighbor have a dispute about your boundary line, it's more about being neighbors than it is where the line is. And if you resolve your relationship, you may not need to know where the line is, at least at this point, and it may not even matter. But if you are a if you go to the evaluation process and they say, well, the line is here, you have not repaired that relationship, and you're going to have another dispute with your neighbor, or you're never going to talk, or you're going to, build a big fence. I tend to be on the transformative mediation realm of, to me, the relationships are what's most important, and the details will work their way out if the relationship is intact. But that all of that is considered mediation.
Yeah.
Same thing happens in restorative justice. There are some processes that I've seen in that people call restorative justice that I would consider maybe not even up to the level of rehabilitation, which is beyond punitive. And once again, it has a lot to do with how much empathy the person who is leading the process has.
Yeah, some of the mediators I talked to, I said, oh, I think empathy is the foundation of restorative justice, and they'll say, and of mediation, and they'll disagree, and they'll see it as mediation is two self-interested, greedy beings negotiating the line between their greed and selfishness, which is a very different model from actually seeing each other's humanity and building a new relationship out of that.
So you would probably place yourself down on the transformative end of the mediation spectrum, as I do.
Yeah, very much so. That's what I find very difficult with the restorative justice terminology, is it seems there's a lot of confusion within it, and I've kind of seen that play out, and it's almost like there's a need for a term like empathic justice or something like that, a new way of creating those delineations about, or you're using transformative justice. So yeah, it's because it gets very confusing.
Well, and Sylvia Klut's unitive justice may take you someplace that you would be interested in going as well. Because she really sees it as we're all human beings, and we're all one, and how can we understand each other rather than blaming each other?
Yeah, how can we see the humanity of each person, even see the humanity of the person who did some kind of an offense, and kind of understanding. And even going beyond the understanding, but feeling what it is that that person, what was kind of going on for them when they did that offense, and yeah. So, and that's what I've kind of seen that you're working towards, is that kind of approach.
Well, and I've been looking for a long time about what is the purpose of the legal system, and my purpose for the legal system is to design, manage, and heal relationships, and that's the foundation that we have for the legal system. I mean, or we could have. I don't think that's what we're currently doing. But if we're, designing relationships has to do with designing our government, designing a contract between the two of us. Like what is it that we need to design at whatever level so that we can live together peacefully. And managing it has to do with, well, if I harm somebody, or if I'm not willing to be accountable, for example, because we are not yet living at a time when the majority of people are willing to be accountable. We're still living at a time when there are a lot of excuses and all of that, and then there are actual disagreements about what happened, and so the legal system can manage that. And then also, I think the most important thing is to heal the relationships when they have broken. And so if our legal system is looking at our role from that perspective, there's a lot to change and a lot of experimenting to do about, well, how do we do that? How do we hold somebody accountable as an adult? Because right now, the accountability system we have is like, you're in trouble. You're 2 years old and you have taken a cookie from the cookie jar and you're caught and you're going to be yelled at and you're going to be punished. And we, in that system, we become 2 years old. And so what is the system that actually calls forth our accountability, calls forth our humanness and the humanity of the people in the system, so that we can take accountability, we can make amends, we can do whatever there is to do about the situation so that we return to a state of peace with each other.
Yeah, it's kind of like seeing social systems, and each one is the structure of the system itself can facilitate, encourage, or discourage empathy and connection. So if we throw, that's what I kind of say in kind of a larger sense, if we throw people into like concentration camps and we say, well, just meditate and be peaceful and connect to yourself, and that's how happiness happens. I mean, that's like maybe one piece of it, but we also have to think of the overall system structures that we live in and transform and change those structures so that they encourage connection and empathy and create peace and so forth. So really, I'm seeing that you're looking at the legal systems, the legal structures, and looking how to restructure those systems so that they encourage connection between people.
Right. And we're so used to the other way, and the other way is so permeates our culture that it really means that it's not, it's sort of hand in hand. Yes, we need to put in the systems so that people can respond to the system, but we also need to be working on society, which is why I admire your work, because we need to have people who can use the new systems responsibly and in an adult manner so that the systems can actually work.
Yeah, and the other thing, one thing I see too there is we need kind of like a vision of what does that culture of empathy and connection and peace look like, so that we know what, I mean, if we're moving towards that, it's like, what does that world look, what does that world look and feel like? And I don't know if you have thoughts about what will that world look like to you?
Well, I do have thoughts about it, and that's why I did the interviews that I did on Cutting Edge Law. So if you went to cuttingedgelaw.com, and there's videos of leaders, is I think what the menu says. I've got over 300 video clips. And those are people who have stepped out of the old model and they're creating something new. And I think they're going the right direction. And like I mentioned Sylvia, because I really admire her work, she's in that process of creating that vision of where we're going. We've got a lot of ground to cover. And one of my friends uses the image of we're building the bridge as we go.
Yeah.
We can see the direction we're going. And we have some materials that we can throw together to make this bridge, but we're not quite sure where the bridge is going to land on the other side, because we can't predict how how some of this is going to develop. You know, I've been watching the Occupy movement, and in some of the videos I've seen, they're using circle process, which is one of the tools that I use in this movement. It's, you know, everybody sits in a circle and everybody's equal, and we all have a conversation with each person being heard one by one. In Chicago, they were doing some restorative justice types of things in the Occupy community, and so that, you know, maybe that's a sign of the way things are going, and somebody might invent something completely new that we have not seen, that everybody says, oh, that's it. But the people who are courageous enough to experiment and step out and do things that are based on empathy, that are based on, you know, bringing all of themselves, their humanity, and, you know, making that kind of difference in the world, are the ones that I want to promote them. I want to showcase them. I want to celebrate them, because, you know, even those people will say, well, I don't really know what, you know, where I'm going, or when I started this, I didn't know. I just knew how it felt, and I wanted to do something different than just fighting all the time. And so those people have stepped out and experimented, and now some of their experiments are succeeding, and so I want to do more of that. And you know, where we're going, you know, I'd really like to see a society that is based on love, and I think we got a long way to go.
Yeah, and I'm kind of hearing there is you can't like wait for the perfect I don't know, the perfect plan or the perfect vision, or the, you know, you know, that perfect leader, you know, whatever it is it's just kind of get out there and start doing it, and have the intention. I kind of see it's just having
Right.
the intention to do it and to struggle. And which is one of the questions I have, is like, how do we get the intention to have that? And it sounds like maybe some of the lawyers that you were working with, is that it was like things got so bad, it's like they just had to find a new way of doing things. So that's maybe where that intention comes from.
Yes. Some of them I no longer practice law in the old model. I was either going to stop practicing law, or I was going to find a new way. And so they found a new way. A lot of people quit practicing law because they couldn't do it. But the ones I'm really interested in are those who found the new way.
How about for you personally? What was it that kind of set you, you know, on that intention?
I had a bad experience in law school where I had an encounter with a fellow law student that left me thinking, I never want to do that. I'm not going to be a jerk. And I was about 5 years after law school, and I met a lawyer. Actually, I happened to be having this interview from Chicago, which is where he was from. And he stood up in a personal growth seminar, and he said, I practice law in a different way. I actually grant dignity to everybody in the process, and it's my goal that at the end of every divorce, that my client and his or her ex can be friends and raise their children together. And I have a spot for kids. I raised a pastel of them, as I say, and I took in kids off the street. I was a foster parent, and I have a long history with what's best for kids. And so when I heard him say that, I said, that I can do. And I had already passed 2 bar exams, but had moved to a place where I was not a member of the bar, so I took the next bar exam, and I hung out my shingle. And I was a lawyer who helped people make peace. And I kind of bumped up against that my colleagues didn't necessarily see themselves in that way. And so I had to start looking for ways to work with people, both my clients and the legal system in general, to find experimental ways of creating peace. And being that weird lawyer that I described earlier, I had a lot of clients who wanted what I had, and then I would have to help them talk about what they wanted in a way that that their soon-to-be ex-spouse could could be enrolled in that and say, oh, I want that too, and then would actually tell their lawyer, that's what I want. And then I had lawyers who were miserable practicing the way they were practicing, who were willing to come to the table and work things out. And so this was back in the mid-90s. We just started experimenting, and I started finding out what else was going on out there. And so I made myself an expert on all the things that were happening in the world that were in that different way of practicing law.
So you're a bit of a pathfinder there. It's like first you kind of, maybe it's like addiction, right? You find you kind of get find the low point, and then it looks like in your case you found some inspiration, someone who stood up and said, "Hey, here's another vision for how the world can be a more humane, more empathic vision of doing law." And then it sounds like you've just been kind of blazing a path, working on developing a new path in that direction.
And letting people know that it's possible. The first thing that is that most lawyers are pretty cynical and resigned, and they don't think it's possible, and they especially don't think that's what their clients want. And to actually see the possibility that this could work actually leads them to try new things and new experiments. Once they see that it's possible to be something other than the mainstream, then they can create their own models.
Well, I'm seeing that as something within the larger society. It's not only within the law, the field of law. I mean, a lot of people, I get the sense, talking about empathy, it's like, I've given up. The world is just this greedy, selfish way. It's just the way, life works. For hundreds of years, the philosophers, the scientists, the academics have been creating kind of this worldview of this is how life is, and just accept it and get used to it and just take care of yourself. And I think that now there's kind of this turn with science like mirror neurons and other science is starting to say, hey, that worldview, it was not accurate. And people knew it in their hearts anyway, with the golden rule and just from their own lived experience, people have known that that's not the way things are. So it's now, I think we're kind of at that point that people are starting to think, maybe there's another way, and it's more than just the legal field. I think it's part of a larger societal movement that you're part of.
Well, and I am tapped into some of the other parts of that movement. One of the things that, one of the tools I use is appreciative inquiry. And appreciative inquiry is about looking for what's working and focusing on that. And so if you watch what I post on Cutting Edge Law, or even on my Facebook group, it will be about the good news of what's happening rather than focusing on what there is plenty of, which is the bad news. But if the good news is getting more attention of, this change is really happening. This is something that is making a difference. These are lawyers who can do it, and what's going on in society actually is going in the right direction. We just need to get more people to go that direction. That approach is much more rewarding for everybody, but I think it builds on the what's good, because we really, in our hearts, we do want it to be this way. We know the difference in being connected with someone and feeling that empathy and shutting that off and treating them like an object. We know the difference. We know how it feels to have that difference, and so it's what we really want. And so for lawyers, it's what they really want too, although we tend to be more cynical and jaded than most people. So that's why I work with lawyers. I actually know that I might find an easier group to work with, but working with lawyers seems to make the biggest difference for me, because if we actually shift the foundational structures of how we get along, I think that it's going to make a bigger difference in society.
Yeah, the lawyers are very influential in terms of, I mean, most people in Congress are lawyers and create the laws. They're creating the legal structures, the
Right.
societal structures.
Yes, and we are the people who serve on boards of directors, and we are in the governments at our local level, and we're leaders in our communities in many different ways. And so we lawyers can make a big difference, and so that's why I work with lawyers.
And what do you see kind of from your work? What's kind of been working the best for you? Kind of the best practices for kind of bringing this worldview and way of being forward?
I think it's finding the people who already know they know it. For a long time, I tried to, I'll call it convert people, and publicly that doesn't work very well. Almost every lawyer I've talked to privately can actually say that they see something of value in this movement. A lot of them say they can't. They see value, but they don't see how they can do it or how they could make a living doing it. And so I've actually put together some programs that are about how can you make a living doing this work to answer that question for the people who want it but don't think it's possible.
So the first, it sounds like the first thing you're saying is network with people who are already kind of there. Get those people together and kind of get that energy and synergy kind of going. And the second thing was, if you can find a way of showing that there's a livelihood, the way of making a living doing this, that kind of works.
It's got to be sustainable, and sustainable on all levels, not just the making a living part, but the emotional part. You know, all levels of sustainability have to be handled, and you know, one of the things about the networking is that most of the people who were the pioneers and trailblazers in this movement were alone in their communities. There weren't other people there who sort of had this awakening experience. They had to kind of fight their way through. I don't remember what, blazing a trail or something that I think you said. I talk about trailblazers. It's like there's a jungle there, and we take our machete and clear a path, and then we say, hey everybody, here's a path. And they say, gosh, that's so easy. Why was it so hard for you? And so these are folks who cleared the path for for their whole community, and they found other people and created a community together. And some of them are still pretty alone where they are. You know, a lot of what I do is I travel around the country and have been for 4 years, and I go and find those people who think that they're alone, or they haven't been connected to this larger community, and I connect them so that they have more energy and courage.
Just lost you there. Had the connection break.
Yeah, I'm back.
Yeah, I just had turned off my video so that it kind of creates more bandwidth, hopefully. Okay, there you are. I'll just make a little sign here for, I'm gonna edit that little glitch out.
Okay.
So yeah, you were talking about the people who are kind of the path makers, the pathfinders, path makers, and that you've been getting them together.
Yeah, a lot of I call them trailblazers, and so the trailblazers, I kind of see them as picking up their machetes and creating a trail where there hasn't been one before. And so they work really hard to find other people to work with them, and they're leaders in their communities, and sometimes they're not appreciated as that, because once they've cleared the trail, other people say, well, that's easy. I don't know why you're working so hard or whatever. And a lot of what I do is I bring those trailblazers together, and some of them are isolated in places where there aren't other people who are talking about this. And so for the last 4 years, I've been traveling around and supporting those people by meeting them and connecting them to other people and showcasing them as the pioneers and trailblazers that they are.
Yeah, so for this kind of work, one of the things that I see also is the dialogue, creating a dialogue around this. So I think now that we have like Skype, we did have some technical difficulties here, but still that I don't even know where you are right now.
I'm in Chicago.
Oh, Chicago. I think the last time I talked to you, you were like in a whole other state or something.
Yeah. I was in Denver, I think. So, and or maybe even Arizona. I travel full time, and the internet really helps a lot in staying in touch. And as you say, having Skype, I now have a lot of contacts who are international, and the communication web. It makes it much easier for us to be a movement rather than just a bunch of isolated people around the country or around the world.
Yeah, and that's what this conference on building a culture of empathy and compassion is about, is that now we can start networking together and bring those isolated people. I had people like in Bulgaria, in Hungary, and we were in a Skype panel like this talking about empathy, and it's like she starts crying, saying, I felt so alone. And I think that's now what we have the opportunity to do, is bring people together, around this value of empathy, that you're not alone if you value empathy. There's two of us right here,
Right. Right. Well, and I'm still doing live events. So I'm here in Chicago to do a live event. I'm doing one in New York, and in Toronto, London, Ontario, Australia. So I still do live events so that people can come together and actually experience it face to face and create local communities. But I don't think that it's as necessary as it used to be to have that face to face, because as we're doing right now, we can have face to face without being in the same location.
Yeah, and start creating this dialogue, I think, is really important. And it's something that, one thing I'm trying to do is start getting a list of how do we build a culture of empathy. Let's start getting a blueprint, a list together. And one thing that comes up with a lot of people have mentioned is just dialoguing about it, just starting a conversation. And I see that's kind of what we're doing here.
Yeah, I also think that there are a lot of resources out there. I just recently have been introduced to Jonathan Haidt, who has a TED Talk, and he's looking at what are our values, and that how we each have a sort of a different constellation of values, but that there are some basic values that we all share. And if we start looking at what is it that we share as a value, and what is it that we can build upon, then there's a lot. Once we start having those conversations, then there's a lot more possibility for branching off from there. And so, centering around something like empathy. I mean, how can anybody be against empathy? I know you probably run into people who say they are, but how can you be against empathy? It's a common human connection. And so I think that's a good place to start, is in dialogue. So we value empathy. What else do we value? And what values do we want to bring into our society? Where do we, what is the society we want to live in? And we've been evolving it for a long time, and there are a lot of things that are no longer working. And so what can we create that does work, that does express the values we have now, versus the values that we created 1,000 years ago when we created the common law?
Yeah. Okay, well, we've gone for about an hour. Is there kind of any topics that you feel we still should cover before we wrap up for now?
No, I'll tell you, I'll tell everybody that law.com is sort of a central place for learning about this movement and finding out who are the leaders in this movement. And you can watch videos or you can read text. It's a huge body of work, and it's also the place where you can find out where there are events going on. And continuing legal education is important to lawyers, or community events that are for the public as well.
Yeah, I actually just brought up the site, so we're showing it on the video at the moment. And I see March 8th through 9th, you have the Burnout to Breakthrough conference.
Right, Burnout to Breakthrough is in Chicago. We're going to be having Andrew Harvey, who his work is about sacred activism, on Thursday night, and that's open to the public. And then on Friday, we're going to do a program for lawyers on making a difference, making a living, and having a life. And doing another program in New York on April 10th. So.
Well, that's great. And then you and I had talked about doing some panels, or maybe a sub-conference around empathy in the law. So I hope we can get that together too.
That would be great.
Okay, well, thank you, Kim, so much for having this dialogue on how we can build a culture of empathy and compassion. And you're such a leader in the field, and you seem to know everyone, so I'm so glad to connect with you, and really look forward to kind of continuing this dialogue in the future and really making that transformation in society that I think is really needed.
Thanks, Edwin. It's been good to be with you. Thanks for your work you're doing.
See the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.